Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Hello and welcome. Today I'm recording this on Guyamuggle and Garigal country, and I'm joined by Athena Manley, an accomplished strategist, advisor and entrepreneur who has spent her career right at the centre of power. Athena's background spans senior leadership roles across top 10 ASX companies, Fortune 500 organisations and high-growth startups. She's worked closely with CEOs and boards on strategy, transformation, turnaround and performance, often as the person in the room trusted with the hardest problems. But what makes Athena's story so compelling isn't just the height she reached in corporate life. It's the questions she started asking once she got there. Just at the point where she was expected to step into a CEO role, Athena did something unexpected: research, evaluating whether this would be a good move for her. And that curiosity led her to explore alternative models of leadership and ultimately to create something entirely new. Athena is the founder of The Flexible CEO, an enterprise designed to bridge a very real gap in the market: mid-sized organisations that need high-quality CEO capability but can't always access it, and highly experienced executives whose talent is underutilised or sidelined by outdated assumptions about leadership, age or career paths. Through her work, Athena connects boards and organisations with what she calls hidden superstars, seasoned leaders who can contribute strategic and flexibly in ways that are healthier for people and more effective for businesses. In our conversation, we talk about love and purpose in leadership, the cost of the traditional CEO model, the rise of portfolio and flexible leadership careers, and what becomes possible when we design work around life, not the other way around. We also explore Athena's personal pivot from corporate power to entrepreneurship, her commitment to improving both financial well-being and mental health in society, and the origins of this very personal purpose, and her vision for an economy that better matches people's capabilities with the organisations that need them most. It's a thoughtful, future-focused conversation about leadership, courage, and reimagining how business really works. I'm delighted to share it with you. Athena, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast.
Thank you, Carolyn. So pleased to be here.
You've just shared some new news with me, so I'm really excited to get into this conversation and just see where it goes. But my signature question for every guest is one I'd love to hear your take on, and that is, when you think about business or purpose in business or just business generally, do you believe that love has a role to play?
I do. And I really do think that, because if you're not loving it, you know how it can bring you down. And it's such a big part of our lives. So if there's no love, I think it's very difficult to sustain a really high level contribution in anything.
Yeah, and is that, like, has that view evolved over time for you? Can you remember a point where it actually changed, or have you always held that view?
Look, I think it's something that I perhaps always hoped for, but early in my career, definitely not. It was sort of, I saw work as something that you would want to make a contribution in, and financially needing something that works well. But then later in your career, you get more exposure to different things, different people, and you realize how much that passion fuels you. So I'd say it has developed over time, and it's always been something that you would absolutely love to have. And does it mean it happens all the time? No, absolutely not. There's certainly times where there's difficult pieces, and they're some of the most satisfying when you look back. So it doesn't mean you need to love every moment, but there needs to be some love or some passion and purpose. And I guess that's what we're here to talk about.
Absolutely. And I think there's going to be a lot of purpose coming through this conversation. So I would love you to share a bit of background about your career trajectory, where you came from, life moments. What are the key moments of your journey that have brought you to where you are today?
Okay, so if I rewind back, I was one of those kids who pretty early on did take some leadership responsibility. So, eldest in the family, eldest grandchild from an Italian background. And so, in my family, certainly my mum was in a lot of poor health. And so, I needed to be able to step up. And at school, I would do things like direct the school play or whatever was going on. So, I valued that ability and started to nurture that fairly early on. And so through your career, that comes in really handy. It might seem like you're quite precocious in your early years, but I think then that grew into when I went through a university. I went in through the time where it was in the recession that Australia had to have. So I don't know if you remember
Mhm.
that, but that's what our Prime Minister at the time said. We had to have this recession, and that meant 17% interest rate. A lot of people out of work, a lot of people losing their businesses, their homes, and my family was certainly impacted by that. And we lost our house in a fire, and we weren't didn't have enough funds, trying to run a business to rebuild. And for me, I saw that, and I saw that financial impact, and that sent me on a trajectory to really want to get a stable income for a start, to be able to support my family, and also to be able to then look at really financial services, to be able to help other families not be in a position like we were. And so that took me through to be a very young branch manager. So I was a bank manager by the time I was 22. And so people have kind of I've had the opportunity to hold responsibility and to learn how to earn people's respect as a young person going through that, and then on to through my executive career. And so through my executive career, it took me into top ASX firms, into Fortune 500 firms, and ultimately culminating in chief of strategy after having been head of you name it in financial services. So, IT, people and culture, transformation, distribution, or, literally you name it. And so I became that safe pair of hands. I guess that's the common thread throughout my career, and still fueled by that purpose of financial well-being and mental health that sits alongside that for so many people. And then, of course, as you know, more recently, I've stepped outside of that corporate realm and built 3 businesses. And the business that I consider to be my life's work as the flexible CEO.
And here we are, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But I just want to take you back to where you were in your corporate role before.
Mm.
You were on a trajectory that, very few people reach, chief of strategy, chief of staff, right at the center of power. And from conversations we've had, the next step was at the top. So what changed?
So I was looking at CEO roles, and being the sort of person that I am, and having studied an MBA and that sort of thing, I went, right, I need to research what this will be like, because frankly, I had some reservations about what life would be like as a CEO. And some people listening to this may have that as well, because what it drew to mind is, yes, there's the impact that you can have leading an organization, which is fantastic. There's obviously the financial component to that. But in addition to that, you hear a lot about collateral damage in your health, in the amount of pressure and health issues that come up for CEOs. So I'd read an article in the Harvard Business Review that had talked about 58% of CEOs having a range of health issues, and this is they're working 60 to 80 hours a week. But the health issues there are a high degree of cardiovascular disease, high degree of divorce rates, and all kinds of things. And having teenage children, I wanted to also be there for them. I've got elderly parents who need care. So there are a lot of things going on when we look at life, as well as outside of professional, that, okay, well, is this really for me? So I started to research, well, if 58% of people are doing that, who are the others? Because that means there are others that are not doing that, who aren't having these problems. And so the first person that I thought of was Richard Branson. And so I wrote a little list, and I started to look at what the Richard was doing. And he's never been an office guy. He's always who's building his business with Virgin Records and beyond in the houseboat on the Thames. And so I started to look at that and realize there's a lot of CEOs who do things differently. And it doesn't have to be done the way that I'd seen it done. And you can have an incredible impact in your profession, in society, not playing necessarily by those rules. And that's where the idea for the flexible CEO was born. And it was quite a crazy story, because a couple of weeks after doing this research into Sir Richard, I'd put up a little, sometimes you put up on your wall people that you would like to bring a bit of what they do into your realm. So, I did that. I put a few people up there. I call them my B board. And 2 weeks later, I get this invitation, and it says, I'm in an executive meeting, it pops up, and it says, Athena, your personal invitation to Sir Richard Branson's private island, Necker Island.
Wow.
And I went, really? And the first thought was, is it a scam? Yeah. And I thought, maybe it's a scam. But then I thought, and I text my husband and go, if you got invited to this, would you go? He's like, you should go. And so 2 days later, I met with the founder of the CEO magazine, Chris Dutton, and he was telling me about the experience he'd been before. He'd profiled Richard on the front cover of the magazine. They'd built a relationship philanthropically, supporting Virgin Unite, the Branson family's philanthropic foundation. And so that led to me going to Necker Island, talking to Sir Richard about what I was thinking at that stage, being surrounded by some incredible people, and ultimately making the call to step in and really do the flexible CEO and take that forward. And I could see such a big opportunity in the market, because there are a lot of organizations, when you look at particularly around CEO talent, where there's organizations, and they're medium to large organizations, be that for profit, for purpose, where the CEOs are struggling with a lot of things. So the boards feel like they can't necessarily afford to bring a top CEO talent in the door at that price point. And so they settle, and they say things like, well, there's no good talent, and Australia doesn't have enough good talent. But meanwhile, I was talking to constantly in places like the Institute of Company Directors or Women on Boards or Governance Institute, lots of places, to brilliant executives and CEOs who had been benched, largely in their 50s and in their 60s, who are at the peak of their professional contribution. And they're sitting there, and they might be on a board maybe doing a little bit of advisory or doing some governance, but they know that if they could just get their hands dirty and into some of these organizations, their expertise is what's needed to turn things around. And so I started to bring those two groups of people together and go, right, organizations that desperately need the wisdom that these people have, and the people who are currently completely underutilized in our workforce, which is insane. And so there is this huge gap, there is this huge opportunity. And so for people to realize that is really important, I think.
I love it, bridging the gap. And we're going to dive more into the flexible CEO and how you do that. But I just want to unpack a few things. I love, and when we met and had our first conversation, you shared this with me, and I love that. I love that you buck the system, right? Most people sitting at that level, with the opportunity to go up to a CEO role in a major corporate, wouldn't think twice. And the fact that you analyzed it and did the research and actually, intentionally figured out, is this right for me and for what I want and for the people I care about, is just something I want to highlight, and for listeners to really take note of, because we so often we just slavishly follow the paths that are set out for us, and I love the critical thinking around that. Did you want to add anything more to that bit?
I would say that it is, once people see the logic, it's like, when you think about, if you've ever worked with an A player, the difference that an A player makes in a fraction of the time, you know that an A player can get things done in a much shorter amount of time and get higher results than somebody else could get with many more hours. And so everyone knows that to be true. And yet when it comes to leadership, we often just look at it as a one size fits all. You must be here and do it in this way. And the most effective leaders, what I found was so many of them are doing more than one thing. They've got a foundation, they've got a group of companies, particularly in the private company space. They're working on an acquisition or a new venture. And so this is actually life and how people are doing things. And so it's not as this job market, there's 20% of it out there that we see advertised. That 80% is very, very different, and you don't normally get exposure to that. And once you crack it open, you realize, oh, wait, there's so many more great opportunities out there, and you can do that in a really purposeful way and not necessarily be bound by the old way of thinking. Because if we keep doing that, businesses who are doing that now are suffering, and that's only going to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive deeper into the flexible CEO, and you've highlighted, the problem from both ends. So first off, at what point did you go from identifying the problem to, when were you on Necker Island?
It was May 2023.
You remember it, the date?
I remember it
so
well.
At what point?
14th to the 17th of May.
At what time? So you
took me 39 hours to get there door to door. I remember that.
So you've identified the problem. You've identified the problem for two entities, two stakeholders, and the gap, and you can see the bridge that can be built. At what point, what did it take you to go from identifying it to, I'm going to solve this?
Okay, so I kept having these conversations, and then I started, at first it was just informally introducing people to each other. And I very quickly realized that you need a system to make that work. You actually need a framework that people can follow. So a bridge needs to be built, because an introduction isn't enough. I mean, you can't walk into a board and say, hey, I think that you could really work with a fractional CEO. And they go, no.
Yeah.
Even though you look at lots of co-CEO models, even organizations like GYG, who went to an IPO a couple of years ago, they got a valuation of $3 billion.
Yep.
And that was way above expectations. And they did that through a co-CEO model.
Is that Guzman y Gomez you're talking about?
Yeah. Burritos.
Yep.
3 billion. And the way that they did that was literally, to get them to that point, was a co-CEO model. So they brought in someone as a chief financial officer because they had the IPO experience. But of course, the investors don't want to just talk to the CFO, they want to talk to the CEO. So to do that, then the founder didn't have that experience. So the dream team comes together, and the exit on that, speaks for itself. But there are these other ways of working, and people are out there doing them and have done them for a long time. So it started off just getting to the point where I needed to develop this system. And coming from my background, I've coached and trained over 1,000 leaders, and I've done things like lots of frameworks through my MBA and internationally and here. And so I had some of the thinking and the building blocks. But what actually we discovered was we could start working with the boards on where they need to go on leadership, absolutely. But we actually did need to work on both sides, and we did need to have kind of a system. And the way that it works from a board perspective then is to look at and go, okay, let's look at your strategy, where the organization is going, the capabilities needed to execute that, and then what leadership is needed. And do you already have that? And what else do you need? And then how could you package it? Not, we've got a role, we need to fill it. Let's get a executive search in and take a brief and off we go. Let's look strategically at your capabilities and what's going on. And coming from a background as a strategist as well as one of my roles, I can help to unpack that, and my team can as well. And so then you can see, okay, capabilities, what do we have, what do we don't? And then we've got, essentially it's like a CEO compass for what do you need, and how do you develop that in someone, or how do you bring that in and get hold of one of these A players that can actually take your organization through that next phase. And so then we stay with them for 12 months. We discovered then that what happens is you drop the person in and you can't just leave them there, because the first thing that happens when you get there is you usually need extra firepower to do whatever that job is. If you're a CEO, if you were in the top ASX or global company, the first call you're going to make is to a consultant. It's going to be McKinsey, BCG, whatever, and to come in and give you that dispassionate analysis and some firepower around the next strategic reset. Now, if you're in a medium-sized company, you are competing against people doing that and spending millions. How do you compete against that? Well, you can, again, access these hidden superstars in the late stage of their careers to come in and do these bits for you. So we can engage them again. We bring those people in to back the CEO, to not to create more pipeline of work for years, to just get in and make this stuff happen. And these are people who have done incredible things in their career and don't get totally underutilized again. And so those medium companies can then compete. They can achieve. And through that, we've got more people finding their purpose, more people being able to, for the purposeful organizations, more of them can reach their mission by taking this model in a way that's financially sustainable. And for medium companies, they can compete with the bigger companies because it's more sustainable. It just makes sense economically. And so for the board, if it can make sense economically and you're looking at it and going, well, great talent actually de-risks your strategy, it's actually a lower risk strategy.
Yeah.
So it's the obvious choice if you can get access to that. So we discovered then that we can work with the boards in that way, but we can actually work with the people going through that point of what do I do next much quicker, and help them create these opportunities, start solving organisational problems, be seen as relevant, stop being told they're overqualified, which is a bugbear, because that's really, when people say we're wanting some fresh thinking and we didn't go with you, it's very thinly veiled ageism in a lot of cases.
I love that you're solving that issue, because there is so much wisdom and value. I mean, you call them hidden superstars. And to be able to connect them with those organizations who seem to have made an assumption that we can't attract the top talent. So we compromise.
There's no other way.
And they don't have
100%.
to compromise. It's
Nope.
just looking at
No,
it
they don't.
differently, and the flexible CEO does that. Before we dive back in, a quick word from me. If you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to know that I work with leaders and organisations on how purpose becomes a powerful driver of trust, performance, and resilience. I speak at leadership conferences and company events about how purpose shows up where it matters most, in leadership, in culture, and in strategy, helping organisations grow with clarity and confidence in a changing world. You can find out more at my website, carolynbutlermadden.com. Now, back to the episode. I love it. I love everything about it. And it sounds like you've got two engines that operate it. The engine that works with the board and the company, and then the engine that attracts the hidden superstars.
That's it. That's it. And so what we find is people be going through a transition where it could be an involuntary thing, it could be a voluntary thing, but for whatever reason, they end up potentially sitting on a beach for a few months. And where I live, there's beach nearby, so it's sitting on the beach. And that's really nice for a little while. But then a few things start to happen. And one of them is that sense of a purpose starts to fall away, that sense of impact. You go from 100 miles an hour, all these phone calls, all these people that you're important to and professionally, to this silence. And that for people, it is a really difficult time. And so I know for myself, when I stepped out to start my own companies, and I left the corporate world, the same week that I left, my husband got made redundant.
Oh my gosh.
So we went from 2 incomes to 0 incomes overnight. And so I also, still supporting family. I've got kids, I've got mortgage, all these things, right? And as most people do. And so you look at that and go, well, there was definitely a moment of, do I just go and do another full-time role and go into another executive role and do that? Or do I stick with what I'd been through the pros and cons. I've been through this. And I thought, if I don't do this, the pros are there. Like the pros of being able to create this impact and what's turned into now a movement is so big that I knew I would regret it. And not being coming out of financial services where I'm very kind of conscious of risk, personal risk was high, but I felt like the professional risk wasn't necessarily very high because I knew that how needed this was and that there were lots of great people who would come together and get behind it and we could do that. But I had to learn it all. And anyone who's listening to this who's stepped into entrepreneurship in any way, shape, or form, the learning curve is something that is out of this world. Like just the amount of different ways you could do things and decisions for things is just, it's mind-boggling.
And
I'm so
adapting
glad I
from
did it.
having all the resources and support as well to having to figure a lot out yourself.
So many things, yeah. And the learning curve is just out of this world. I think when you do go through that and make that myriad of decisions, it's a whole new skill in itself. Absolutely. And there's this awesome book called Who Not How, and that's one of the things I kept coming back to, and to the point where I had a post note on my desk that said Who Not How, because I started off doing everything and very quickly realized I knew I wanted to put a team around me, but it's at what point and how and all of those things, which I now know. But at the start, you don't. And so some of the biggest leaps forward, of course, came from picking up the phone and just calling someone going, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? And inevitably someone knows someone who can help. And now if I look at my network, it's just absolutely exponential. So, that's fantastic.
And how do you find those CEOs or executives, the benched
That they're very
executives?
that's very easy. That's the easiest thing that there is, because when you have a message that and something that you're trying to do that really makes an impact, people, the great people just they'll appear out of nowhere. They'll hear about the flexible CEO or hear about me. I'm certainly out there, and that's something I've needed to do for this, is to be out there on LinkedIn, speaking at the Governance Institute, speaking at Women on Boards, at the AICD, doing these things, and very soon internationally as well, to be able to get that message out there. And then now it's taken on a life of its own. And so, so it's really great to see, because when I meet people who are looking to make more impact in that later stage of their career, they're already experienced, and they've got executive experience, they might be doing a board already. I know where they can go next, and it's so exciting because I'm like, oh, this is going to be amazing for you, and then it's going to be brilliant for the organisations who then get your help. So whatever
There's just so
ends up
much
looking.
value, like multiple value that you're delivering through what you do. It's quite extraordinary. And we're going to go deeper into, the speaking and your book. But I just want to stop for a moment because, again, I love that you challenged the traditional path, right? Just like you challenged it in terms of walking away from that big corporate job because you analyzed it, you critically evaluated it. I love that you challenged the traditional path, and I just think there is so much more opportunity through what you're doing. But for our listeners, to just think where what else can I challenge? As you were talking about it, I remembered. Have you heard of a company called Sharesies in New Zealand? It's a company that helps people get into investment.
No.
And I saw them speak at a conference a few years ago, the Purpose Conference a few years ago. And one of the things they talked about, which I loved, was their 3EO model. And it came from the founders. There were 3 founders, and there was a CEO, but she went on maternity leave. And the other 2 covered for her, and she came back and became CEO again, and then went on mat leave again. And when she came back the second time, she actually said, this is crazy. Like, why should I be the only CEO? Why don't we share this? And they created a 3EO model, and it's worked for them really, really well. So again, it's that challenging the traditional path. How might we do this differently? Because the world's very different as well.
Oh, it is so different. So I think right now the traditional path just isn't working for so many people. And I was talking to people about this morning and all day yesterday and the day before that, because what's going on is, back when I was growing up, what I needed to do to try and get some stability and make sure I had a job in a recession and all that was right. Try my best, try and get into uni, get a stable job, hold on to it, do my best, move up the line. Now, that model is such a small part of what's actually going on in business now, that if we continue to for people in experienced system, if you go out there and apply for a job in the traditional way, what tends to happen is that you put your cover letter together, you spend hours tweaking that, your resume, you send that forward, you never hear anything again, over and over and over. And then you get a conversation with somebody, you're down to the last couple, and they say the words, yes, we thought you were a bit overqualified, or we wanted that fresh thinking, or have you got any feedback? Oh, no, because they're not going to tell you what it was. They just felt more comfortable with someone who was fitting that mold, and that mold is usually the research. I was looking at research from the Australian Human Rights Commission and from Danish University, and so it is still, if you are white, 45 years old, male, it is the most hireable that you can be. And so if you're anything outside of that, then that is where it starts to drop off. So we can reverse that. We don't have to settle for that. But if we play by those rules and go through traditional recruitment, then we're going to get that result. And when I see people going through that, it just makes my blood boil. Look, after that when I was younger, my house burning down, I was in high school and all that sort of stuff, I saw my father go through that. So the business, all the money from the business went into trying to support the family. And then, of course, the business then starts to suffer. So Dad would go and do extra cleaning jobs through the night. He would show up at building sites at 5 o'clock in the morning and ask for work. He would go to, there was a flour mill, he would go there and ask for work, and he would get turned away because even though he was fit, he was strong, he was a bit older. And I saw this, what we call the danger decade, in the sort of 50s to 60s, and these gaps get bigger and bigger. And this is, it's not right, but it happens, and it is happening, and it's happening more. And the Australian Human Rights research from last year shows that it's happening younger. So when you said earlier about it happening in 50s, they're saying now from age 50, 51.
Wow.
And in the last 2 years, it's gotten younger.
Wow. How much younger?
Well, it's down to that. It used to be kind of 53, 54. It's getting younger. And it's also happening to people under 24. And so what's happening is we're not becoming, as the population is getting older and staying well for longer, we're not catching up with that. We're not giving people these opportunities, and then we're wondering why we haven't got enough wisdom to navigate really troubled times in business. And so I just found, I guess what made me really make the leap was that my blood boiled when I saw what happened to my dad. And when I saw it happen to other great people, I had to do something about it. And so the model didn't come to me initially. It came over time on talking to people, on working with people, and then seeing how that could evolve in a way that really works. And then recently it's really, it's at that point where it struck a chord and is expanding exponentially.
My blood boiled. It's I have a mantra. I have a mantra that purpose isn't powerful until it's personal.
Mm-hmm.
Personal. You felt it. You
Mm-hmm.
felt the implications of what happened to your dad, and that has clearly driven you. You've talked about your purpose, and I'm reading it here from your LinkedIn profile. My purpose is to lead and inspire businesses that improve financial well-being and mental health in society.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on, I'm a business owner, strategic advisor, and director with a portfolio of innovative companies. Like that purpose, you are serving it in whatever way you can. I was going to ask you, at what point did your purpose become clear to you? But it sounds like its origins lie deep.
They do, and so for me, it was a bit more like a discovery process, a bit more archaeological, because I had that thread from early on, but I didn't know exactly. You don't know where it's going to lead you, right? But I did have that strong sense. The ageism piece didn't, at the time, it infuriated me, but that piece, I guess, uncovering that came a little bit later on as I started to talk to people and realize what was going on. And I did an exercise, really when I came up with that phrasing was I did an exercise in the leadership program at Harvard in 2019, and we were coming up with our own leadership charters to guide where we were going to go. And then from that, you can look at in our case, we're looking at the pillars of your character that are going to contribute to that, and what are these standards you are going to hold yourself to that live into that purpose. And I found it really difficult to come up with the exact words, and I mulled over it, and I did a lot of things. I remember sitting in the LAX lounge there because I needed to submit this final assignment on my way back to Australia, and just going, right, this is the closest words to what I feel. But at that time, did I know that it was going to take me here? Absolutely not. But I do think that statement guides me. And not only that, people see it. If you do have that sort of thing on your LinkedIn, I've had many people reach out to me because they have a connection to those things too.
Because it
And
reflects who you are.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. And for them too. So it is so powerful to be able to connect with people, and to be able to do any work that contributes to that in some way is brilliant. Yeah, it's very, it does make me get up on lots of days where you think, oh Lord, I've got to get up and do some things. That's what's going to get you up in the morning. That's what works for me.
And I say this over and over again on this podcast and in my work, but it bears repeating. People are so stuck on purpose being your why, and it is. But if you're not clear on who you are, then the why, you know, doesn't connect as strongly. It's your identity. And when you talk about the people who, are attracted by that and connect with you, it's because they share a similar narrative. Your who connects with their who. Yeah.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. I would love you to share when you came on before we hit record, you shared some really exciting news, and I'd love you to share it here.
Oh, yes. Well, the next couple of months are shaping up to be a really exciting time. So I'm heading across to speak at Harvard on top CEO moves and how to make them. And also the same week speaking at the UN in New York. And there I'll be talking about the flexible CEO model and how it can be used across countries around the world to really increase economic inclusion and tap into the latent potential in a lot of organisations economically. So that's what I'll be talking about there. And in addition to that, I'm in the throes of putting together the Flexible CEO book, and that's going to be released in Times Square. So it will be ready for pre-order very, very shortly.
That is amazing, and I think you said mid-year
Yeah.
would be released. So once you get your pre-order page up, we will add a link to the show notes of this. Congratulations. That's so exciting. The book, the Harvard talk, and the UN talk. It's Athena, you're building a movement.
That's it, absolutely.
Well, you started.
Who knew? Who knew?
Incredible, incredible. So I'd love to ask you to think ahead, to dream with me, right? Imagine 5 years from now, in your wildest dreams, like be ambitious with your dreams.
Ooh.
If everything you're working towards and you care about came to life, what does success actually look like?
All right. I think we've created an economy where there's a path of least resistance for great people to be connected with organisations that need them and to build portfolios that make sense for their stage in life. They've got caring responsibilities for elderly parents or children or their own health, or they want to contribute to society in lots of different ways, that is normal. And it can be done with ease, and that my family and friends through this journey still see me and I get to work with incredible people like I do now. I think that would be the ultimate package.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Now, if somebody listening to this wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Definitely jump on LinkedIn, Athena Manley. You can find me, connect with me, and also you can come along to our masterclasses in portfolio career mastery. And so we're having one of those a month. You're welcome to join at any time. So Caroline, I can always give you the link there for people to join us as well. More than happy to, and we'll pop in a little code to join for free.
Oh, thank you. We will absolutely share that link, and I think I'll jump on one of those myself.
I'd love to see you.
Thank you so much for joining me and sharing what you have created. It is extraordinary, and I can't wait to follow your journey and get your book and see where this leads. I would love to invite you, Athena, to close out the show with any final thoughts.
Thank you. I guess my final thoughts go out to organizations who are struggling with their CEO talent, and to know that there is support out there to change that situation. And to those who are going through a transition or thinking about it with their career and want to create that dream portfolio, yes, it can exist. Yes, you can do that. And, it's very, very possible. So if you're feeling that sense of almost, sometimes we even feel like a ghost in our own town as other people walk around doing what they're doing and we're not doing it at that point in time, then, we see you. There's definitely ways through that, and more than happy to help.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?